there, my name is Marley and welcome to my February reading wrap-up where I'm going to talk about all the books I managed to read in February, as I do every month. This was a shorter month and I actually finished less books than usual, but let's get into it. First of all, I am going to do a quick overview of some stats for my reading month. As always, if you don't want to see them, you can skip ahead with the timestamps below to the reviews. But first of all, I read 7 books this month, so not as much as usual, but I did read a couple thicker books, to be honest. This equated to about 3,422 pages, and my average rating was a 3.7. In terms of genre, I only read from a few this month. It was mainly fantasy and romance, each of those at 42.9%. Peach, don't scratch. Hey. And then we had thriller at 14.3%. I read 4 ebooks and 3 physical books this month. 4 of the books I read were adult and then 3 were YA in terms of audience. Then I tracked the gender and I read from 6 female authors and 1 male author. So I continue to read more from female authors, which is not a surprise. And then I read from 6 authors that I have read from before and only 1 author that was new to me. And then in terms of when the books I read were published, I mostly read newer books this month, with 1 coming out in 2023, 5 coming out last year in 2022, and 1 coming out in 2021. So I think that's all the ones I'm gonna go through. Now, as always, I will talk about the books in the order that I enjoyed them, so starting with my least favorite and leading up to my favorites. So starting out, we have to start with Shipwrecked by Olivia Dade. I read this for a romance reading vlog, which you can find on my channel if you want to watch that and see more of my in-the-moment thoughts for the romances I read this month. But if you watched that, you would have seen I didn't manage to actually finish this book in that vlog in the time frame that I did, mostly because I was not enjoying this book and it just was really a slog for me to get through. If I enjoyed it more, I probably could have got through it quicker. But in that vlog, I said I'd let you know my final thoughts in my wrap-up. So here we are. This is a romance book, as I said, and it is the 3rd book in the spoiler alert trilogy that Olivia Dade has been doing. Each book surrounds this fake TV show that resembles Game of Thrones for us, and it follows actors from that show and their love story with someone in each book. I did not like the first book that much. The second book was a lot better for me, and unfortunately this 3rd one was the worst, and I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5. Which is a pretty low rating for me. So in this particular book, we are following, can I remember their names? Let me look that up. Right, Maria and Peter. This one's a little different from the previous books in the series because both of these people were actors on this show instead of it only being one of them. And we have kind of, seen these two in the background of the other books, but I had pretty much no impression of them going in. I could not remember what their characters were supposed to be. But basically these two characters' roles on the show is that they are love interests and that they go on this island to film together, so they're a little bit isolated. Basically, when the book opens, so this is not a spoiler, first page, first words, we see that these two have had a hookup. They've had a bit of a one-night stand as they bumped into each other and were immediately attracted and hooked up. But then Maria ended up leaving in the middle of the night or something, and Peter was really rubbed the wrong way by that. Then they end up meeting at this audition again. They were in the area because they were auditioning for the same show, and they end up getting paired together for the audition, and as you can imagine, there's some tension as they did obviously just sleep together, and they both end up landing the role for this TV show and having to work together under some very awkward circumstances with this history they've just had. Now, personally for me, I'm someone who doesn't like a lot of smut and doesn't like when the characters sleep together too soon in a book. So right off the bat, I was not a fan of the fact that these characters hooked up first chapter of the book, and the fact that it was actually shown on page a little bit as well. It wasn't just mentioned, we actually saw it. Immediately they don't get along, so it's a little bit enemies to lovers vibes, but in a way that made me uncomfortable because I felt like it was mostly Peter, the man, being really, really rude to Maria in a way that I found unacceptable. And from the start, for these reasons, it was really hard for me to get on board with this romance. We start to see their relationship develop as they're filming this show, and there of course were some cute moments between them, but then the pacing was a little weird in this one because we jump ahead like 6 years to the end of the show and when they have to start doing press and stuff like that. And at this point I was kind of enjoying the chemistry between the characters because now they've known each other for a while and they're having these like attraction scenes, and I think that's where the vlog left off. But unfortunately it went downhill from there. From the halfway point, I felt like pretty much everything was resolved. Like they ended the show, again, I don't want to spoil exactly, but like I felt like all the conflict was really resolved and these two were essentially together. And so the last half was just very, very boring to me. It was basically just scenes of them together, a lot of smut, kind of forced exposition about both of their families and their backgrounds. But I was like, what is the conflict? Like there's no conflict here. Eventually we got a conflict that honestly just really pissed me off, and I didn't really agree with what ended up happening. I just kind of disagreed with the whole thing. So for these reasons, I did not really enjoy this book. The writing can also be very cringy and just not really for me. I will say obviously Olivia Dade always has some cool rep in that both these characters were fat, but I just don't think I'm going to be reading from this author anymore, unfortunately. This was kind of like my last chance to Olivia Dade, and yeah, she didn't pass the test. Next up, we have the book that I just finished literally moments ago. I was trying to race through that book so I could film this video. I didn't think I was gonna be able to finish in time, honestly. But that was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is another pretty long book. I think it took me a full week to read. It took up a lot of my time. And unfortunately, I did feel like I kind of slogged through it. And for that reason, I'm giving it a 3-star. So if you don't know, this is the latest book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. So it's the 4th book. And this is basically an adult fantasy romance series that concerns fairies, a lot of fairy porn. You know, you've probably heard of it. I've actually been enjoying this series quite a bit. I think I gave the first 2 books 5 stars. The 3rd book I might have given a bit lower, but this one I was a little excited for because we're following a new couple in this one. We're really focusing on Nesta and Cassian, which Nesta is Feyre's sister from the previous books, and we got a little hint of these characters in the other books. And I really do like Nesta, as she's kind of that trope of a character of like a bitchy girl, but like, you know, she's soft underneath, and I just like those types of characters. And I will say, like, I enjoyed Nesta's parts of this book. If it was only Nesta's POV, I think this book probably could have gotten a 4-star rating for me. But unfortunately, we are also seeing from Cassian, the Illyrian fairy warrior man, and I don't even hate him. I don't even hate him, but it's like I didn't enjoy his perspective. I generally don't enjoy male perspectives in romances. I think in the previous books, we mostly just had Feyre's, maybe a little bit of Rhysand, but not a lot of the male POV. This one was pretty equal between the two, and it just made it more boring for me. It made it longer, and there's just so many icks that I have with it, with how Sarah J. Maas writes fairies and just the, I think it's called gender essentialism, and how they always say male and female. It just really irks me. I don't like that, and I don't like how like animalistic she always makes her creatures and her fairies. Like, their sense of smell is so strong, and it's very off-putting when they can like smell the horniness on the other characters. I just feel like it makes me really uncomfortable. Speaking of horniness, there is so much smut in this book. It's the smuttiest book I've ever read. Definitely more than, you know, the other books in the series. As I already mentioned in this wrap-up, it's not my favorite. You know, I like 1 or 2 smutty scenes. This was a lot, and obviously it's kind of uncomfortable to get into like the details of those scenes, but it just didn't all work for me. Again, I don't like the sort of animalistic kind of stuff. We don't need to get into it, but I'm just saying, like, I didn't love that part of it. I think I would, you know, I prefer kind of contemporary romance smutty scenes over like fairy stuff, you know what I mean? So those are my major issues, but as I said, really love Nesta as a character and liked her character development. I really liked the friendship she created in this book and the found family aspects. It's just too bad because I do enjoy so many aspects of this series, but there's just things with Sarah J. Maas that have really been bothering me lately. So I don't know what's in store for the next book in this series, if it's gonna follow someone like Azriel or Elaine or something like that, but I am interested in continuing to hear from more of these characters, but I don't look forward to like the length of them and some of the cringy stuff. But anyway, so this was a 3. Next up we have It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover, another book I read for that romance video. So you guys are probably aware again of Colleen Hoover and the fact that this is the sequel to It Ends With Us, which is a book I read in 2019, so before the whole booktube book talk craze, but I did really enjoy that book back then. So of course I wanted to pick up the sequel, and like many others, I was slightly disappointed with it. Even though it's been a while since I read the first book, I still feel like it felt very similar to the first book and that there wasn't a ton of like progress made. If you don't know, this is kind of like a romance but more of like a literary fiction book because it does focus mostly on like domestic abuse, and it's really about this woman getting out of that type of situation, and this one focused more on her finding her new love with a man called Atlas. And so I did enjoy those aspects, although I found it to be quite cheesy. I found Atlas to be a little too perfect, which I've heard other people talk about as well, and it did really upset me seeing those kind of abuse and toxic scenes again. So I really only recommend this for certain people, like people who really were big fans of the first book and want something similar. So I think I only gave it a 3.5 star rating. Still pretty good. I always do enjoy her writing style. It's very accessible, very easy to get through, and it felt pretty short. So pretty short read, but yeah, I have a little bit of mixed feelings on this one. Speaking of mixed feelings, next up we have Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. I have a whole spoiler-filled reading blog for this if you want to check it out if you've read the book and want spoilery thoughts. As for spoiler-free, this is the 3rd book in the Last Hours series. It takes place in the Shadowhunter world that she has been building, and it follows the kids of the characters from the Infernal Devices. So I've really been enjoying this series in the past. It's a very character-driven series. There's not as much plot as there are relationship and character stuff, which I hadn't minded in the previous books. I think I gave the other 2 like 5 stars each. I just love Cassandra Clare's writing. She's one of my favorite authors. I think she's so funny and she builds such interesting characters. However, I only gave this book a 4-star rating because I did have quite a few disappointments with it. For one thing, it is like super long and I feel like it wasn't really necessary. There was a lot of stuff that was repetitive and a lot of drama that was dragged out, especially interpersonal drama between the characters. That was very frustrating, and a lot of scenes where I'm like, okay, this is just the same scene we've seen already. And then it took a while for the plot to actually start, and even then the villain and that kind of stuff wasn't super interesting to me. And so I think this would probably be my least favorite series of the Shadowhunter series. I'd have to reread them all to do like a final ranking or something, but especially as this being a finale, I feel like it was a little lackluster. There was a character death and I kind of wish someone else would have died. Like I'm not content with who died. I know like I wouldn't be happy with anyone dying, but I don't know, I just found it really upsetting. But at the end of the day, as I said, I do really love Cassandra Clare, so that's why I still gave it a 4, even though I'll admit like it probably doesn't deserve that. I feel like, you know, she could have done a lot more interesting stuff with this, but there was still a lot of fun stuff for me. So yeah, that is Chain of Thorns. Next up we have the highest rated romance from that romance blog, and it was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is a adult romance book about Alexis and Daniel, and it's called Part of Your World because they just come from, as you can imagine, 2 very, very different worlds, and we're trying to see if their romance and their relationship can make it through, because essentially Alexis is this really successful doctor from the city, and she is just driving through this small town one night and her car goes into the ditch, and then Daniel, being the super sweet small town guy that he is, helps her out of the ditch, and that is how they meet, and they end up having this whirlwind kind of connection and sleeping together. They go back to, you know, their own separate lives, but they end up reconnecting. They can't stop thinking about each other, blah blah blah, kind of start this relationship, but there's so many things stacked against them, like their careers, their life paths, their place in society. There's a lot of pressure on Alexis from her family, but I found this book super, super sweet. It definitely reminded me of more of a book that was similar to Emily Henry's romances, which are my favorite, where, you know, they have the romance and kind of the comedy stuff, but they also have a lot of deep stuff going on too. Both characters are dealing with a lot of serious issues, especially regarding like their parents. Alexis is just getting out of a toxic, abusive relationship. You know, there's a lot of depth to it that I really appreciate, and these are the types of romances I really enjoy, rather than sort of the super fluffy, ridiculous rom-coms. So I think it would be a great romance for people who are into those types of books. It still was pretty funny. Like, there was still that funny kind of craziness sometimes, but I think this could be a very well-loved, well-rounded romance that I highly recommend, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. So now we're down to my final 2 books, and we have Heat Wave by TJ Klune, and this is the 3rd and final book in the Extraordinaries series. This is a YA fantasy contemporary series. It has very contemporary vibes. It's almost like Adam Silvera, where they're like contemporary but also not. TJ Klune does that a lot. Like, he has fantasy, but they still feel kind of contemporary and like rooted in real life. But anyways, it deals with superheroes in a city called Nova City, and we're following our main character, Nick, and he is this teenage boy with ADHD. He's queer and he's obsessed with the superheroes, and he has this little group of friends, and in the first book he's just writing fan fiction about superheroes, daydreaming about them, wanting to become one, and then there's this whole adventure from there. And obviously I can't talk about specifics with this one, but there's a lot of action, a lot of like cute found family stuff, real family stuff, like a father and son relationship that's really beautiful and really focused a lot on in here. I have to say, YA books are getting more and more lenient with the sexual content. Cassandra Clare's book, I felt like, had the like sexiest sex scene she's ever written, and this one had some pretty detailed sexual content as well, which surprised me, but also, I mean, I think teens can handle it. Especially this was a queer romance between 2 boys, and so there was definitely some stuff in here I had never read before, and I think could be really helpful for young gay boys just to kind of read about characters that are going through the same things that they have. So I would definitely recommend this to any young queer people out there. This series would be really, really great for you, but honestly it's great for everyone. Like, I'm reading it now at 26 and loving it. Like, it's very funny. It's a little over the top. I did give it 4.5 stars because there were moments I'm like, okay, is this getting a little too young for me, a little too YA? And there was a lot of like action scenes, which aren't my favorite, you know, with superheroes fighting, you can imagine, but I still really adore this series. So, and lastly, my final book of the month, and it's no surprise to me, probably no surprise to you if you watch my channel frequently, but it was 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. She's the author of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, which is one of my favorite trilogies ever. I talk about it a lot on my channel, and this is her newest release. It's a standalone YA thriller, and it's so good. I give it 5 stars. I was so nervous I wouldn't like it as much, but I did love it. I don't know if it would be for everyone, I will say that disclaimer, but it was for me. If you don't know the plot of this, we're following a group of teenagers who are going on this sort of weekend getaway in an RV. So they are driving to this spot and they end up getting lost, getting stranded in the woods. When their tires get blown out, quickly they realize they are in a like hostage situation where there is a shooter keeping them hostage in this RV and threatening them, saying that one of them knows a secret and they need to tell them before the end of the night or he's going to kill them all. So we're mainly following our main character, Red, and she's definitely an unreliable narrator. Like, she was having some weird memory problems, and she's mentioning that like she kind of has a secret, so we don't know if it's her secret that they're after or if it's one of the other characters that she's with, because they all seem to have secrets. You know, they're trying to escape the RV. It's just this really cool, fast-paced story that, you know, all takes place in this one night. Because of that, that's why I think it might not be for everyone. It's kind of chaotic. It's kind of all over the place. And some characters are really frustrating. There's one character in particular that was so grating. Like, I hated him, but it was just so good. Like, I couldn't stop reading. I think I read in like 2 days. Could have read it in one sitting if I had the time. I really do recommend this, especially if you enjoyed her other series. But honestly, it's quite different in that but we're just following such different characters than Pip was in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Red is still dealing with some anxiety and things like that and trauma like Pip was, but she is still rather different, and this whole setup is a lot different from A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. If you have heard of that one and comparing it with this, they're very different plots, but I think she did an excellent job with it and just can't wait to read more from her. She's definitely one of my favorite authors. So that is it for my February wrap up. Hope you guys enjoyed, and please let me know if you have thoughts on any of these books, if you've read them. Be sure to follow me on Goodreads and Storygraph. My links are in the description so we can stay in touch throughout the month. You can also follow my Bookstagram account down there too. I don't post too much, but you know, still would love to stay in touch. So yeah, thanks so much for watching if you made it this far. Hope you have a great March, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!